Alright, buckle up, because I'm about to tell you about the most terrifying few months of my life, and how I had to become my own hero because no one else would step up. It all started a few months ago when this guy moved in across the street, and on his very first day, I noticed it. A telescope set up outside his window, aimed directly at my bedroom. My blood ran cold, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Then came the first interaction a few days later. He knocked on my door to introduce himself, and one of the first things out of his mouth was, "You are worth going to jail for." Just like that, my heart pounded. The entire interaction was stomach-churning. I closed the door on him, but he persisted until I opened it again, warning him not to come inside. He just stared at me blankly, then walked away with a smile, and not a single word. I immediately ran to my bedroom, and, no surprise, his telescope was still pointed right at my window. I tried to clear my head with a long shower, but every creak, every distant sound, felt like him. The next day, I went to the police. Surely they would listen. I explained the situation, how concerned I was, but I was quickly reminded that as a woman, sometimes you're just not taken seriously. They listened, but seemed utterly uninterested. One officer actually asked if I was sure I wasn't imagining things. Another said, "It's not illegal to own a telescope," and told me to come back with actual proof. Apparently, his creepy remark was just a distasteful joke in their eyes. I walked home, defeated. Just as I feared, things got worse a few days later. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw his shadowy figure hunched over the telescope. But his movements were different, more frantic. It hit me. He was masturbating while watching me, and when he noticed I was looking, he didn't stop. He started moving faster, as if me watching him was exactly what he wanted. Just before I could wrench myself away from the window, he stopped. I saw something drip from his hand, and I felt sick to my stomach. I actually ran to the bathroom and threw up. I stayed awake all night, every second a nightmare. This man was a psychopath, and he wasn't going to stop unless someone made him. As soon as the police station opened, I was back there. I poured out what I'd seen, explained my eye bags from lack of sleep, desperately hoping they'd grasp the severity. I told them I was terrified he'd find his way into my home. I even told them about my ex, a stalker, detailing how he'd shown up at my job, left notes, run into me, all of it, just to make them understand. But once again, I was reminded what it's like to be a woman. They told me if I was so worried, I should move or get better curtains. Another officer reiterated they needed concrete evidence, and my word just wasn't enough. It was crystal clear. I wouldn't get any help from them until it was too late. I knew then and there, I had to do something myself. Weeks bled into months, and Joseph, yes, I eventually learned his name was Joseph, got bolder. The second the gifts started appearing on my doorstep, I knew this had escalated too far. Small things at first, flowers, chocolates, even a book I'd mentioned once in a conversation at the local cafe. Then he started bringing them to me in person, asking to hang out often, but I always brushed him off, claiming to be busy. Things were spiraling. One evening, he knocked on my door, beaming, holding a small box. He practically shoved it at me, clearly proud. I found them together. They were in love, so I had to keep them together forever. In the box were 2 dead frogs, preserved, nestled in a decorated shoebox. He called them Chris and Curtis. My stomach churned. I forced a smile, but my insides were boiling, the taste of sick creeping up on me. "I have to go," I mumbled, closing the door on his expectant face before sprinting to the bathroom to get sick. He was a psychopath, a monster. Throughout all of this, the telescope remained, his dark silhouette often visible behind it. When he showed up at my door again one evening, with a stuffed animal and that creepy smile, I knew, if the justice system wasn't going to help me, I had to help myself. It took every ounce of courage, but I had a plan. I would play along. I deduced that if I pretended to be his friend, he wouldn't hurt me. He was too infatuated. So that's what I did. I kept him at a distance, but extended an olive branch of friendship. I invited him over for coffee, making sure my brother's number was on speed dial, knowing he'd be in town that weekend. When Joseph walked in, he tried to hug me, but I extended my hand, shaking his instead, and led him to the kitchen. We talked. He told me I had the most beautiful bedroom, and that I looked even better so close up. We only sat in the living room when he came over, so I knew he was referring to his telescope voyeurism. A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced a polite, "Thank you." It was getting late. I'd arranged for my brother to call me at 6 p.m. sharp, giving me an excuse to kick Joseph out. 10 minutes before 6, I realized I didn't even know his name. He volunteered it. Joseph. And before I could give him a fake name, he said, "I enjoyed my time here with you, MIA. He tried to hug me again. I shook his hand once more, sending him off. Hearing him say my name was sickening. I felt violated. This nightmare was becoming overwhelming, and after that encounter, I questioned if playing along was truly a good idea. But I was determined to stand up for myself. I had to keep going. The next week, he invited me to his apartment to watch a movie. He asked if I'd seen Silence of the Lambs. I said no, an odd choice for a first pick, but I went with it. Throughout the film, I caught him looking at me, hoping I'd look back. I recognized that look, the dead fish stare men give before they try to kiss you. I never returned the glance. Each time he invited me over, we'd watch a movie and order food. But I noticed something. He never let me into his room. That door was always firmly shut. I knew there had to be something in there he didn't want me to see. One night, after a movie, I told him I needed to use the restroom before heading back to my apartment. As I got up and headed towards his bedroom, he grabbed my arm. Tight. He twisted it. I jumped, turning around, terrified of what he might do next. He realized he was hurting me and let go, offering a strained smile. He mumbled something about his toilet not flushing, that maintenance would be in soon. I told him no worries, and got out of that apartment as fast as I could. I normally kept firm boundaries, but this time, I'd let it get too out of control. Still, I knew that room held the evidence I needed to prove his obsession. It sickened me to think what I might find, but it was my only chance to end this. One afternoon, I went to his house with a plan. I brought a bottle of wine. We sat down, and I poured us each a glass. Joseph immediately scooted closer, his thigh pressing against mine. He talked animatedly, and I nodded, feigning engagement. As the movie played, his hand found its way to my knee, squeezing it. I stiffened, but he didn't seem to notice. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered about how alcohol made him feel more intimate. I forced a laugh. He whispered about how beautiful he found me, and how long he'd been waiting for that night. I excused myself, claiming to fetch more wine, and nervously, discreetly, slipped something into his glass. Returning, I handed him the drink, my heart pounding. Joseph took a long sip, his eyes never leaving mine. Gradually, his speech slurred. His eyelids began to droop. He mumbled something about needing to lie down, struggling to keep his eyes open. Even as he faded, Joseph wanted me. He leaned in, attempting to undress me. His movements were clumsy, desperate. Just as his intentions became clear, his eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward, his head resting heavily on my shoulder. I gently eased him onto the couch, watching as he fell into a deep sleep. My heart raced as I stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts and the courage to proceed. Taking a deep breath, I made my way to his bedroom door. It was always firmly shut, locked. I struggled at first, noticing the odd-shaped keyhole. Before panicking, searching for the key, I checked kitchen drawers, the living room. Then I knew. I had to check him. I reached into his pocket, afraid he might wake up. No key, only his wallet, a vape, a pack of gum. Just as I thought this was all for nothing, I opened the wallet, stashed between his money. There it was, the key. Relief washed over me. I took the key to the bedroom door. I hesitated for a second before pushing it open. The sight that greeted me was worse than I had imagined. The walls were covered in photos of me, some taken through the telescope, others obviously snapped without my knowledge. Photos of me in restaurants with my friends, even some from inside my own apartment. There were drawings, notes, even some of my missing personal items. He had built an entire shrine of me, and it made my skin crawl. I took photos of everything, documenting the disturbing collection. I went through his things. This was the evidence I needed. I slipped out of his house, leaving him to sleep. The next morning, I went straight to the police with the photo evidence. They finally took me seriously. The photos were undeniable proof of his stalking and obsession. The officer who'd told me it wasn't illegal to own a telescope looked at me and said, "We failed you, and for that, I'm truly sorry. Your bravery in gathering this evidence has made a huge difference." Detectives examined the evidence and prepared to arrest Joseph. Turns out, he had charges pressed against him by his ex-girlfriend for stalking her after their relationship. He was arrested later that day, and I breathed a sigh of relief. When they asked how I'd gotten into his house, I explained our so-called friendship. I told them how he'd come over with gifts, how I'd spent time with him to gain his trust. I even told them about Chris and Curtis. The officers were shocked, but understood why I had to do it. As they led Joseph out of his apartment in handcuffs, I stood across the street, watching. He glanced over at me. He looked hurt and betrayed, but I felt nothing but relief. Update. I walked away from this whole situation with a lot of psychological scars and a deep fear of people. It's been over a year since it all went down, and although I'm happy to say that I've dealt with the situation, I'm not happy to inform that the mark he left on me was so severe, I now struggle with dating. I was so scared of my old house and that street that I spontaneously quit my job and moved out, living in my car for about a month, until I was able to find a new home a few states away. I also found a job in a field that I like, so that's something, I guess. But in general, life is pretty bleak right now. There are still nights where I dream of him, and every time someone rings my doorbell, I still have the fear of it being him. However, I do know that is not the case, as he was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, followed by mandatory psychological treatment. At least I can take solace in that.